How's it going, folks? Brian Cusco here at Triple B. Today's guest is Mr. Jay Sommers. He's giving a talk at the Herpetoculture Talks, and he's giving a talk on caudates, salamanders, newts, things like that. And he's got lots of good slides to show, lots of different really rare newts and salamanders. And after he does the slides, he talks a little bit about what people who keep things like salamanders and newts and people who keep things like retics, one of the big things that we have in common. So I urge you to stay till the end of the video and check out everything that he has to offer. You're watching Triple B TV.
I maintain a large collection with a lot of different species, literally hundreds. And so when I was asked to do this talk, I didn't really know how to approach it because there's not a lot of information and a lot of exposure to newts and salamanders in captivity, especially in the United States. So I thought what I would do is just kind of do a general overview and an introduction. So it's going to seem a little bit elementary. I've avoided getting into specific details like dechlorinating your water because I would assume most people here are familiar with the fact that you need to do that. So what I did is I included a lot of pictures of different species that I've kept over the years. Not generally regarded for my quality of pictures. I take a lot of pictures of animals in my hands. I don't really care. I've found that my pictures are for me to look at, and I am not known to share a lot of pictures with other people anyway. So, and many species have come through my collection over the years that never got a picture taken of them, and some of them were extremely rare. So with that, we'll go forward. This is actually the first Iranian newt that I ever owned. It was on the first shipment to the United States that I'm aware of. It was in the mid-2000s. Someone in this room is responsible for these animals coming. But the shipment came and they got scooped up really quickly. And that particular animal was one of my first ones. I got 7 out of that group. So I'll tell you what got me interested in newts and salamanders. Basically, when I was a little kid, you could go to a pet store and there were newts and salamanders and anoles and other things. I was always fascinated by them because of the sheer variety and variability in color, physical characteristics, behaviors. They're aquatic, there's arboreals, there's semi-aquatics, their breeding behaviors are interesting, their reproductive methods are interesting, and so there's extremes. So I picked probably what I think is the ugliest species I keep and what people think is subjective, the most beautiful caudate. So the one on the left is most likely Tyolatotriton leeson-changii, but not 100% sure on that. And of course, the one on the right is Neorugus kaiseri. There's aquatics. The animal on the left is a Gulf Coast water dog, Necturus bayeri, and the animal on the right is a Pseudobranchus. It's a dwarf siren. They get about the size of a pencil, both North American species. And then we have in the U.S. Something called a hellbender. My hellbenders are legal since I'm being videotaped. My animals are long-term captives that were collected under permit by a zoo, and they eventually made their way into my hands. And the animal on the right is Paramezzotriton deloustuli. It's the Tamdao warty newt. They have a range into China, but this specific form is from Tamdao, which it lives sympatrically with, like the Vietnamese mossy frog. And then we have terrestrials. We have the barred tiger salamander on the left, and the red sawling fire salamanders on the right. We have arboreals. The animals on the left are Bolitoglossa franklini, and the animal on the right is literally the arboreal salamander. Anites lugubris. From
Is that normal variation on the left of the?
male is black, female is the patterned animal. So they're dimorphic. It's another interesting thing. And then we have semi-aquatics. This is Rhinophilus porphyriticus, which is the spring or seep salamander. And then the animal on the right is the marbled newt. It's a male in breeding display, cresting. So I didn't want to get into too much specifics about setups because there's so many different newts and salamanders, and they all require, different setups. And it's easier to get into details like that when you're focused on doing a talk on one species or one group. But I'll just show some simple setups. So the animals on the left are baby, well, they're not Pseudoeurecia belli anymore, but it's a salamander from Mexico. And that's a good setup for raising babies of those, which only 2 people I know of, myself and one other included, have ever bred them. And paper towel is the best way to raise those. And then the animal on the right is just a common fire salamander, salamandra, which is no longer imported. I'll get to that later. And then some aquatic setups. The animals on the left are Japanese firebelly newt, and the animal on the right is a Japanese swordtail newt. And then some breeding. Like I said, I won't get into too much of this stuff because I really wanted to expose people to the variety of newts and salamanders and what there is out there, even though the hobby is effectively dead regarding getting new species into the U.S. So these are Nebulosa. It's a species of rib newt, and they're an amplexus. Rib newts, fire salamanders, Tylodotriton, a few species do this type of amplexus. And you have a couple of different methods of reproduction in caudates. You have egg layers, and I don't know if you can see or not, but there's eggs right here. This was the first time I ever bred Lauensis, and I don't even remember what year it was. I had gotten babies from a guy in Germany named Paul Backhausen and raised them up for like 4 years, and then all of a sudden somebody imported adults. Thanks to Philippe, I was able to get my hands on some of those, and I bred them. I believe it was 2011. And then just some animals caught in the act here. That's a T-positive form of an axolotl that I imported from Germany. And on the right is Triton lauensis now, laying their eggs. And they have to have a very specific type of plant for them to lay their eggs in, or they will not lay. And then on the left we have Bolitoglossa franklini. It's a kind of a typical plethodontid behavior for keeping their eggs. I mean, you see a lot of Ensatina do this. I mean, a lot of salamanders in North America do this, where they lay their eggs like that. That was one of the highlights of my life, by the way. Breeding any Bolitoglossa is something of a goal for hardcore salamander keepers. So, and on the right is Echinotriton andersoni, which is the Japanese crocodile newt, or Anderson's crocodile newt. They lay their eggs on land, and then the larvae hatch and fall into water. Another prized species. So we have live bearers. We have fire salamanders, which are all live bearers. Some, like the one on the left, which is just a really high yellow sawling terrestris. They give birth to larvae, and then things like Salamander atra give birth to fully developed terrestrial babies. That baby is literally like 45 minutes old in this picture. I've been working with atra for 15 years, and I've produced 20. They give birth to 1 or 2 babies every 1 or 2 years, so they're not highly productive. Just some more fire salamanders giving birth. And then we have larvae, which is what we refer to as like hatchling newts and salamanders. They're not called tadpoles. So on the left are just some axolotls, and on the right that's Pyrogastra, the Japanese firebelly newt. And The very commonly imported and soon to be probably never seen again by most people, firebelly newt on the left, Cynops orientalis. They're not Cynops anymore, but I won't get into taxonomy. You see they're very, very small. That's a US dime. And then on the right is an Echinotriton andersoni. You cannot raise andersoni larvae together because they will eat each other. And that is the first leucistic rib newt that was ever produced in captivity. I was lucky enough to be the person that happened to out of normal adults. That was in 2007. And I got some babies that were normal, raised them up, bred them, and they produced the first leucistics in captivity. So, you know, when they get ready to morph out, you have to get prepared because some of them will do fine in a semi-aquatic setup and some of them will drown. Things like Echinotriton will drown, some crocodile newts will drown, other animals, they do well. The animals on the left are Onychodactylus tsukubaensis, the Tsukuba mountain clawed salamander from Japan. I was able to get some of these animals before they were formally described because they were still considered Japonicus, which was a species that was known for decades. And on the right are the first Lautriton lauensis produced in the United States, getting ready to come out of the water. And so they come out of the water, they can be quite small depending on the species. The one on the left is the blue-tailed firebelly newt, and the one on the right is a marble newt. We have some baby belli, and then on the right, Neururgus crocatus, which is they have different names. It's a Neururgus from Iraq. And so I just threw some different animals in there to show you guys some variety. The animal on the left is called the Himalayan crocodile newt. It's Tylodotriton varicosus. And then on the right is my very first morphed Neururgus strauchi. That was the very first species that most of us were able to keep. Kaiseri was not available. But these were around in the hobby for many years. Basically, when you morph out the babies, their care is similar to the adults. You just have to feed them smaller food and make sure that they can't dry out. They're more susceptible to desiccation than an adult is. So newts and salamanders come from all over the place. I'm very lucky to have all the members in the genus Neururgus. This is formerly, it's been in taxonomic flux. It's Microspelota, Durgigini, goes back and forth. I'll call them Durgigini. It's the Kurdistan newt. For those of you that know your politics and geography, Kurdistan is not an easy place to get animals from. That's a baby on the right and an adult on the left. Crocatus from Iraq on the left, and then Kaiseri from Iran on the right, which is a CITES Appendix 1 species now. And you just can't have too many pictures of Kaiseri, so I put more in there. And then strauchi is from Turkey. So all of these species are all very clustered, close together. And then Asia, and I thought I would use this opportunity to touch on rarity of animals, because in my lifetime, I've had some extremely rare animals. Animals that are really rare and worth a lot of money, and animals that are extremely rare and have zero value whatsoever. And some of the most rare species I've ever gotten my hands on were at some like mom and pop pet store out in the middle of nowhere. And Jordan Russell called me one day a few years ago, post Newt and Salamander ban, I believe. Is that right? It was after the Newt and Salamander ban? And a pet store up in Menifee, Canyon Lake up there, had these two newts. And he sent me a picture and I said, oh, holy crap, I gotta go up there and buy those things. So this is probably Tylodotriton asperimus. And some had come in, and I knew that they had come in, and they were in really bad shape. But every once in a while, somebody orders these things on a wholesale list, and they come in, and everybody else kills them. And for some reason, these people have success. A lot of animals thrive on neglect. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know. So it turned out to be a pair. I was pretty happy about that. I have not been happy in the last 3 years because they haven't bred for me. And then the animals on the right are Tylodotriton quietuensis, which was called the Mandarin crocodile newt. Some other animals from Asia. These are both from Japan. Echinotriton andersoni. I am very lucky to own this species. It is a true privilege. In Japan, you can't even touch them. They're a national treasure. All the people that I sell animals to in Japan and that I know in Japan are just like, how do you have Ibo Imori? That's the Japanese name for them. And I said, well, I have friends at zoos. And I have animals that they want. And when they offer me, or when they ask me for animals, I say, well, I either want a pygmy hippo or I want Echinotriton andersoni. And then they say, well, we can't give you a pygmy hippo. I said, I know. That's why I asked. So, and then the animal on the right is called a gold dust swordtail newt. It's Insicata popii. It's a subspecies. And then North America. I don't really keep too many North American species just because I can go catch them. I'm from the Midwest. I live in San Diego now. But I used to have the luxury of traveling, just a few hours and finding a lot of really cool caudates, especially in Arkansas, Oklahoma. So this is a redback salamander, and I have to be honest, I don't remember which redback it is because there are two. There is Plethodon cinereus and Plethodon serratus, and frankly, they look freaking identical. And they can be sympatric, which adds to the confusion. And on the right is just that same picture of belli. Just because I didn't have a lot of North American species that I didn't already have photographed. Europe. So we have the alpine crested newt, which is a really cool little newt with beautiful color. And then on the right is a Coimbra locality of the Portuguese fire salamander, Gallica. And then, so this is the first leucistic Spanish rib newt that was ever produced, the only one that lived out of that batch. And this animal on the right is actually a piebald that Philippe produced from animals I gave to him, and then he gave the animal, this piebald, to me. I haven't been able to prove it out. It's a female, so it makes it a little bit longer term project. So I can get into herpetoculture a little bit because there's some viability in a few species like axolotls and rib newts that lay big clutches all at once, which is one of the problems for the other species of newts and salamanders, that most of them breed and then lay their eggs, 2 and 3 here. A couple days later, they'll lay like 2 eggs. 3 days later, they'll lay 5. And they do this for like 3 months. Whereas a couple of species like rib newts and axolotls, other Ambystoma do it too, but they lay like 300-400 eggs in one night and just get it over with. And with the morphs, and the fact that these are aquatic and tolerate warmer temperatures than most newts and salamanders, it makes them more viable for the pet trade. And right now, it's a massive market because there's a vacuum created by the injurious wildlife listing, which I'll touch base on here in a second. So here's some axolotls, just different color mutations that I produce here and there. Some of them are like one-offs, or I produce a couple of them a year, and they're not really a recessive trait, and others are. They're not really piebald. Some call them mosaics. Not enough work has been done with that, even though they've been in labs for 70 years. And then these are just some mutation of Triturus carnifex, the Italian crested newt. So I think that's my last slide here, yeah. So I don't recall what year it was. Is Phil in here? Or did he leave? Phil, what year was the Newt and Salamander ban? Yes. Exactly. I remember calling Phil when I found out about it because I'd heard from some people over in Europe, and some AZA folks kind of caught wind of it, and someone called me and told me, and I didn't believe it. And the man whose name I won't mention that was in Phil's place before Phil was, I had lengthy discussions with this guy for years about the threat of the exploitation of diseases on amphibians, and how if they can take down amphibians, every other reptile and amphibian, or every other reptile, snakes, lizards, will be easy. Because, newts are inoffensive. Nobody's scared of a newt. And sure enough, some groups there might be some legitimacy to it. I don't see the legitimacy of listing a native U.S. species as injurious wildlife to the United States. However, 201 species of Newt and salamander were banned from import and from crossing state lines until the lawsuit was won. And we can now move them across state lines, but we cannot import them. Interestingly enough, if you have a newt with chytrid fungus and you live in a state that has a port of entry, you can export your sick animals to other countries. U.S. Fish and Wildlife doesn't seem to care about that. But we cannot bring new species in. So they effectively killed the hobby. What is in captivity now that's on those 201 species, which pretty much is every commercially available or every species that was, is in the hobby. All the crocodile newts, crested newts, rib newts, everything. Things that are not on the list are things that most people would never have access to anyway. And so there is a threat of chytrid fungus. I don't know how much of a threat there is from captive bred animals. And I don't know what the future is for that. But there's been a lot of talk here about people coming together and everybody being in their own bubble. And I can guarantee you that I, as a Newt and salamander keeper, have a lot in common with the guys that keep green anacondas and Burmese pythons and retics, except mine are really small and theirs are really big. But the threat is there, and we're in the same boat. And there's a lot more money in amphibians than there are in big snakes, and people have a hard time wrapping their head around that because the individual cost of an animal comparatively would be more for, say, a mutation of like a piebald retic. However, you're dealing with an animal that can lay 3,000 eggs in a year, and the babies are $50 a piece. I mean, it's a numbers game. And so, I hope if there's one thing that can come out of this weekend is that people can start talking to each other like we used to 30 years ago, and respect each other's opinions and kind of get some headway here, because we're all in big trouble. And I watched a significant amount of my revenue get destroyed when they passed that law. I mean, I had to start selling eggs across state lines because eggs were exempt. And when you're dealing with an animal like Kaiserei, which is a value of $100 a head, and then I have to sell the eggs for like $15, it's significant. And so I have had to make adjustments, and I can no longer import new animals. So, and Fish and Wildlife, for some reason, will not let me import eggs even though they are exempt. But then again, you get into fire salamanders, and they don't even lay eggs. So what's here is here. And people ask me, well, you got this army of fire salamanders. You have all these different species. Why won't you sell them? Well, because I can't get any more. So, it's something that I hope we can have some good discussions tomorrow. A few people that are here from other parts of the country, and even people from out of the U.S. It's going to affect you too, because you're not going to have us as a market. And Fish and Wildlife's getting wise to people crossing stuff over the border. So, and all that publicity is no good. So with that, I will end my talk, and if there's any questions, feel free. Thank you.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Jay, for doing that great talk. I bet you guys that have questions for Jay, he will answer any of them for you. The next Herpeton is coming up weekend of May 2nd this year, and Jay lives down there in San Diego. I only imagine he'll be attending the conference. If you want to speak with Jay about anything, I highly recommend coming to the conference and checking it out, seeing what it's all about. Next week, we've got my good buddy, Mr. Marshall Platts on. He's going to be talking about the time that he changed the laws in his hometown to make snake keeping legal when it had used to be illegal. So that's a really good one as well. Until then, you've been watching Triple B TV. Y'all take care. This is what it's come down to. Me and you talking about this stuff. Okay. Are we ready? Are you sick? All right. Ooh. who's the next guest? Oh, son of a